A millionaire's black nanny has a matching birthmark, raising questions about their past. What shocking truth will a DNA test confirm about their shared history? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. In the gleaming headquarters of TechVision Industries, Victoria Blake sat at the head of a mahogany conference table, surrounded by board members in expensive suits. The quarterly meeting was crucial. They were discussing the company's expansion into artificial intelligence, a move that could either cement their position as industry leaders or cost them millions. Victoria maintained her composure, but her attention kept drifting to the glass wall of her office, where she could see Angela White, her daughter Sophie's new nanny, organizing the child's play area. There was something about Angela that Victoria couldn't quite place. The way she moved, her mannerisms, even the way she spoke to Sophie seemed oddly familiar. The board meeting continued with presentations and projections, but Victoria found herself watching Angela more frequently than she should. During a particularly detailed financial forecast, Victoria noticed Angela consoling Sophie after a minor fall. The tenderness in Angela's actions reminded Victoria of someone, but she couldn't place who. Ms. Blake. The CFO's voice brought her back to the present. Your thoughts on the investment timeline? Victoria straightened in her chair, quickly scanning the projection screen. The timeline seems aggressive. Let's review the third quarter projections before committing to such a substantial investment. Her response was professional, but her mind remained partially focused on Angela. As the day drew to a close, Victoria gathered her belongings, preparing to take Sophie home. Angela was helping Sophie pack her backpack when it happened. Angela reached up to adjust Sophie's hair ribbon, and her sleeve slid down slightly.
Victoria froze.
There, on Angela's inner wrist, was a distinctive mark, a small, crescent-shaped birthmark that looked exactly like the one Victoria had carefully concealed under her watch strap for years. The sight sent a chill through Victoria's body. She had never seen anyone else with that particular mark, shaped exactly like hers, in the same location. The probability of such a coincidence seemed impossible. Angela noticed Victoria staring and quickly pulled her sleeve down, but the moment had already passed between them, heavy with unspoken questions. That evening, after Sophie was asleep and Angela had gone home, Victoria sat in her home office, surrounded by old family photographs and documents. The family archive, always kept securely locked away, now lay spread across her desk. Victoria had never felt compelled to dig deeply into her family history before. The Blakes were old money, their legacy seemingly straightforward and well-documented. She began with the oldest albums, studying faces from generations past. Her grandmother, Elizabeth Blake, appeared in many photographs, always poised and proper, but Victoria noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. In photos from the late 1960s, Elizabeth's smile seemed forced, her eyes holding something that looked like sadness or regret. Victoria found herself particularly drawn to a photograph from 1968. Elizabeth stood in front of the family summer house, wearing a conservative dress typical of the era. But it was her posture that caught Victoria's attention. She was standing slightly turned, as if leaving space for someone who should have been in the picture but wasn't. As she continued searching, Victoria discovered a locked drawer in her grandmother's old desk that she'd never noticed before. Using her grandfather's old keys, she managed to open it. Inside, she found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon and a small diary with its pages yellowed by time. The diary's entries were sporadic, but they hinted at events that had never been mentioned in family stories. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she opened the first letter. The paper was delicate, the ink faded but still legible. As she began to read, she realized she was looking at a side of her grandmother she'd never known existed. The letters spoke of secret meetings, of hopes and fears, and most intriguingly, of choices that would protect the future. This discovery led Victoria down a rabbit hole of research. She spent hours cross-referencing dates, names, and locations mentioned in the letters with old family records. Something significant had happened in the summer of 1968, something that had been carefully erased from family history. The more Victoria uncovered, the more questions arose, and each answer seemed to lead to more mysteries. As midnight approached, Victoria sat back in her chair, surrounded by the evidence of a family history far more complex than she'd ever imagined. The birthmark she shared with Angela couldn't be a coincidence, but what did it mean? The pieces were there, but they didn't yet form a clear picture. One thing was certain: her grandmother's carefully maintained image of a perfect family life was hiding something significant, something that might explain the impossible coincidence of her new nanny sharing her unique birthmark. In her modest apartment across town, Angela white-paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear. The conversation with her mother had started normally enough, discussing work, bills, and daily life. But when Angela mentioned her new position as Sophie Blake's nanny, her mother's breathing changed noticeably. "The pay is good, Mom. Victoria Blake runs one of the biggest tech companies in the country. But something strange happened today." Angela paused, considering how to describe the moment. "I saw that Victoria has the same birthmark as me. Exactly the same, in the same place. Remember how you always said mine was unique?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was strained. "Maybe it just looks similar, honey. Lots of people have birthmarks."
No, Mom.
"It's identical. The same crescent shape, same spot on the inner wrist." "What aren't you telling me?" Her mother cleared her throat. "Angela, some things are better left in the past. I need to go now. I have an early shift tomorrow." The call ended abruptly, leaving Angela staring at her phone in confusion. Meanwhile, at TechVision headquarters, Victoria was diving deeper into her family's history. Her assistant had pulled records from the company's archives, including old newspaper clippings and society pages. One particular article from 1968 caught her attention. It announced her grandmother Elizabeth's temporary withdrawal from social activities due to health concerns. The timing aligned perfectly with the mysterious letters Victoria had found. Further research revealed something even more intriguing. During that same period, Elizabeth Blake had made several generous donations to a small medical clinic in a working-class neighborhood across town. The clinic had long since closed, but Victoria found records of regular payments continuing for years afterward, always in cash, always through intermediaries. Victoria's search was interrupted by a notification on her phone, a message from her mother's old housekeeper, responding to her inquiries about Elizabeth. The message mentioned that Elizabeth had kept a separate apartment in the city, something never discussed in family circles. The apartment had been maintained for years under a different name, its existence carefully hidden from the public. As Victoria processed this information, Angela was making discoveries of her own. In her mother's old keepsake box, hidden beneath yellowing birthday cards and school reports, she found a photograph that made her heart skip. The image showed her mother, much younger, standing beside a elegant woman whose features bore a striking resemblance to Victoria. The woman's face carried the same determined expression Angela had noticed in Victoria during their interactions. The photo was dated 1990, but Angela had never heard her mother mention knowing anyone from the Blake family. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Remember your promise." The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, and precise. Angela spent hours that evening searching online for information about the Blakes. News articles painted a picture of a powerful family with deep roots in the city's history. But it was the gaps in their story that intrigued her most, periods where family members seemed to disappear from public view, only to resurface months later with no explanation. She found herself particularly drawn to articles about Elizabeth Blake, Victoria's grandmother. The woman's public image was perfect: society events, charity work, business success. But in every photograph, Angela noticed something in Elizabeth's eyes that seemed at odds with her polished appearance. It was the same look her own mother got when discussing certain parts of their family history, a mixture of sadness and determination. The coincidences were becoming too numerous to ignore. The identical birthmarks, the mysterious photograph, her mother's strange reaction, and the gaps in the Blake family history, they all pointed to something larger, something deliberately hidden. Angela realized that accepting the position as Sophie's nanny might not have been the coincidence she'd initially thought. As she prepared for bed that night, Angela caught her reflection in the mirror, her eyes drawn to the crescent-shaped mark on her wrist. For the first time in her life, she wondered if this birthmark wasn't just a quirk of genetics, but rather a sign pointing toward a truth her mother had spent years trying to protect her from. The next day would bring new revelations, but for now, both women lay awake in their respective homes, each wondering about the other, each feeling the weight of unspoken histories pressing down on them. The truth was there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. The morning sun streamed through Victoria's office windows as she waited for Angela to arrive. She had spent the night rehearsing this conversation, but now that the moment had arrived, her carefully prepared words felt inadequate. When Angela entered, both women recognized the weight of what was about to unfold. "Please sit down." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I think we need to discuss something." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing her birthmark. Angela unconsciously touched her own wrist, the gesture confirming what they both already knew. Their conversation began tentatively, with careful questions about family histories and backgrounds. As two successful Black women in their respective fields, they found common ground in their experiences navigating predominantly white spaces. Victoria spoke about building her tech empire from scratch, while Angela shared her journey through education and early career struggles. "I've always felt like an outsider in certain circles," Victoria admitted, her usual corporate facade slipping slightly. "Even with all my success, there are still rooms where people look at me like I don't belong." Angela nodded, understanding deeply. "I know that feeling, but at least you had the Blake name to open doors. Some of us had to break them down ourselves." There was no bitterness in her voice, just stated fact. The conversation shifted to their families. Angela revealed that her mother had always been evasive about certain aspects of their history, particularly about her father's side of the family. She would change the subject whenever I asked too many questions. "Now I'm wondering if there was more to it than just painful memories." Victoria shared her recent discoveries about her grandmother Elizabeth's secret apartment and mysterious disappearance in 1968. "There's something here, Angela. Something that connects us beyond this coincidence." She gestured to their matching birthmarks. As they talked, the similarities between them became more apparent, not just physical traits, but mannerisms, ways of thinking, even their approach to problem-solving. It was as if they were looking in a mirror that reflected across generations. Angela hesitated before sharing her next revelation. "My mother, when I told her about your birthmark, she practically hung up on me. She's never acted that way before. She's hiding something, and I think it's connected to your family somehow." Victoria leaned forward, her business instincts kicking in. "There's a way to know for certain." She pulled out a document from her desk drawer, consent forms for DNA testing. "We can end the speculation. Find out if there's really a connection." The forms lay between them on the desk, a bridge between their two worlds. Angela stared at them, thoughts racing. What if we find something we're not ready to know? What if this changes everything? "It already has," Victoria responded softly. "The moment I saw your birthmark, nothing was the same. We can either live with the questions, or we can find answers." After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, both women reached for their pens. The decision to pursue the truth would set in motion events that neither could have anticipated. As they signed the forms, Victoria thought about her daughter Sophie, wondering how these revelations might affect her future. "The results will take a few weeks," Victoria explained, her professional demeanor returning slightly. "Until then, we should continue as normal, for Sophie's sake if nothing else." Angela agreed, but they both knew there would be nothing normal about the waiting period. Every interaction would be colored by the possibility of what the test might reveal. Every shared gesture or expression would take on new meaning. As Angela left the office, both women felt the shift in their relationship. They were no longer just employer and employee, no longer just two women who happened to share a strange coincidence. They were now partners in unraveling a mystery that seemed to reach back through generations. That evening, as Victoria watched Angela leave with Sophie, she caught herself studying their interactions more closely. Was there something of her grandmother in Angela's smile? Were the answers they sought written in their shared features, hidden in plain sight all along? The laboratory envelope sat unopened on Victoria's desk for 3 hours before she could bring herself to call Angela. When Angela arrived, both women stood staring at the sealed results, the weight of potential revelations hanging between them. Victoria broke the silence first. "Whatever's in here, it changes things. Are you ready for that?" Her fingers traced the edge of the envelope, but she didn't open it. "I've spent the last 2 weeks imagining every possibility," Angela responded, settling into the chair across from Victoria. "I think the not knowing has become worse than whatever truth we might find." With careful precision, Victoria opened the envelope. The clinical language of the report stood in stark contrast to the emotional magnitude of its contents. As they read together, the scientific certainty of genetic markers and probability percentages confirmed what they had begun to suspect. They shared DNA. "Second cousins," Victoria whispered, her eyes scanning the details repeatedly. "Through my grandmother's line." The scientific confirmation hit harder than either had expected, transforming suspicion into undeniable reality. Angela sat back, processing the information. "This explains why my mother always avoided questions about her family. But it doesn't explain why the connection was kept secret all these years." Victoria pulled out her grandmother's diary, which she'd been studying obsessively. "Why since their last meeting? I think the answers might be in here, but I've been afraid to dig too deeply alone. There are references to decisions made for the good of both families, but nothing specific." They spent the next hours poring over old documents together, their shared DNA now giving new meaning to every photograph, every letter, every mysterious gap in their family histories. Victoria noticed how Angela's hands trembled slightly when handling the old photographs, the same way hers did, another shared trait they'd never noticed before. "Look at this." Angela pointed to a notation in Elizabeth's diary from September 1968. "There's an address here, written in the margin. It's in the old part of town." The address matched the location of the mysterious apartment Victoria had discovered in her earlier research. Victoria pulled up the property records on her computer. The building's still there, converted to offices now. But in 1968, it was residential. She paused, considering. "We should go there."
Now.
Angela asked, though she was already gathering her things.
Now.
"I'll have my assistant clear my schedule for the afternoon." Victoria was already reaching for her phone. "Whatever happened there in 1968 connects our families. I think it's time we found out how." As they drove through the city, neither woman spoke much. The DNA results had shifted something fundamental between them. They were no longer just two women connected by coincidence and speculation. They were family, bound by blood and a shared history that had been deliberately hidden. The old building stood as a testament to a different era, its brick facade weathered but dignified. As they parked, Victoria noticed Angela taking deep breaths, steadying herself. "We don't have to do this today," she offered. "Yes, we do," Angela replied firmly. "We've come too far to stop now. Whatever's in there, whatever we find out, we face it together. That's what family does, right?" The word family hung between them, new and powerful. They were no longer employer and employee, no longer just two women sharing a mysterious birthmark. They were descendants of a secret that had shaped both their lives without their knowledge, and they were about to uncover why. Inside the converted building, Victoria and Angela discovered an old records room that held documents from previous tenants. After hours of searching through dusty files, they found what they'd been looking for: a lease agreement signed by Elizabeth Blake under a different name, along with a collection of personal papers that had never been claimed. Among these papers, they found a leather-bound journal that revealed the truth about their shared history. Elizabeth Blake, Victoria's grandmother, had fallen deeply in love with James White, Angela's grandfather, during a time when such relationships faced brutal social opposition. The journal detailed their secret meetings, their shared dreams, and the impossible choices they faced as an interracial couple in the 1960s. Victoria read aloud from one entry. "James represents everything my family claims to despise, yet he shows more nobility in his quiet dignity than all the wealthy men I've known." Our love may be forbidden, but it's the truest thing I've ever known." Her voice trembled as she recognized the weight of her grandmother's words. Angela discovered a series of letters exchanged between her mother and Elizabeth Blake. These revealed that her mother had always known about the connection but chose secrecy to protect Angela from the scandal and potential backlash. One letter particularly stood out. "My dearest Marie, I know you wish to tell Angela the truth, but consider the world we live in. The Blake's influence could either shield her or destroy her. Let her build her own life, free from our complicated past." The revelation hit Angela hard. She sat heavily in an old chair, processing the fact that her mother had carried this secret her entire life. "She was trying to protect me, but she also denied me the chance to know my own history, my own family." Victoria found documents that painted a complex picture of her grandmother, a woman torn between societal expectations and genuine love. Elizabeth had used her wealth and influence to ensure Angela's family had opportunities while maintaining a safe distance to protect them from scandal. The crescent-shaped birthmark, it seemed, was a genetic trait that had unexpectedly resurfaced, connecting past to present. "My grandmother was living a double life," Victoria mused, examining more papers. "Running the family business, maintaining her social status, all while secretly supporting another family, your family, and carrying the weight of a love she couldn't openly acknowledge." Angela's hands shook as she read through more letters. "All those times my mother struggled to make ends meet, yet somehow we always managed. Was that Elizabeth? Were we surviving on Blake family money all along?" The truth created a complex web of emotions for both women. Victoria wrestled with the realization that her family's wealth and status had been built on maintaining appearances at the cost of genuine human connections. Angela grappled with understanding that her mother's persistent secretiveness came from a place of protection rather than shame. As the afternoon light faded, they sat surrounded by the evidence of their shared history, each processing what it meant for their future. The revelation brought answers, but also new questions. How would they move forward with this knowledge? What did they owe to the past, and what did they owe to themselves? Victoria broke the contemplative silence. Our grandparents' love story was buried by prejudice and societal expectations. Now we have the chance to acknowledge it, to honor it. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But this affects more than just us. How do we tell our families? How do we explain this to Sophie? The dynamics between Victoria, Angela, and Lisa shifted dramatically in the weeks following their discovery. Lisa, Angela's teenage daughter, had always been aware of the stark differences between her family's modest life and the wealth of families like the Blakes. Now, finding herself suddenly connected to that world, her reactions were complex and often contradictory. During one particularly tense afternoon at the Blake residence, Lisa wandered into Victoria's home office while waiting for her mother to finish work. Victoria looked up from her computer to find the teenager studying the awards and certificates on the wall with an intensity that reminded her of herself at that age. "Did you always know you wanted to run a tech company?" Lisa asked, her tone carrying a challenge beneath the simple question. The way she stood, arms crossed and chin lifted, spoke volumes about her conflicted feelings toward Victoria's success. Victoria considered her response carefully, recognizing the importance of this moment. "Actually, I started coding because it was the only thing I could do for free at the public library. Being a Black woman in tech wasn't exactly encouraged back then." She watched Lisa's posture shift slightly at this shared understanding of systemic barriers. Their conversation deepened as Victoria shared stories of her early struggles, of being underestimated and overlooked. Lisa gradually settled into a chair, her defensive stance softening as she recognized elements of her own experiences in Victoria's journey. However, when Victoria mentioned the advantages her family name had eventually provided, Lisa's guard went up again. "So you had a safety net," Lisa pointed out sharply. "Must be nice to take risks when you know you can't really fail." The bitterness in her voice reflected years of watching her mother work multiple jobs just to maintain their modest lifestyle. Meanwhile, Angela observed these interactions with growing concern. She noticed how Lisa's eyes lingered on Victoria's designer clothes, her state-of-the-art devices, the casual displays of wealth throughout the house. The admiration in her daughter's gaze worried her, not because she didn't want Lisa to aspire to success, but because she feared the complexity of their newly discovered family connection might overshadow Lisa's own sense of identity. One evening, after finding Lisa researching Victoria's company instead of doing her homework, Angela decided to address the situation. "You know, having connections doesn't guarantee success," she began, but Lisa cut her off. "Mom, do you realize Victoria makes more in a day than we do in a month? And all this time, we've been family. How is that fair?" Lisa's words hung in the air, heavy with implications about class, race, and opportunity. Victoria, overhearing part of their conversation, found herself increasingly drawn into their family dynamic. She recognized in Lisa the same hunger for success she'd had at that age, but also understood Angela's protective instincts. The situation forced Victoria to confront her own privileges in a new way, seeing them through Lisa's eyes. When Victoria attempted to mentor Lisa, offering guidance about college preparations and career paths, Angela noticed her daughter becoming increasingly distant from their own family traditions and values. The growing influence of Victoria in Lisa's life created an undercurrent of tension that neither woman could ignore. The tension between Victoria and Angela reached a breaking point during what was meant to be a conciliatory dinner at Victoria's home. The dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and antique furniture, served as a stark reminder of the socioeconomic gulf between them, despite their shared DNA. Victoria had prepared the evening carefully, hiring a private chef to create a sophisticated menu. However, her attempt at hospitality only highlighted the differences in their backgrounds. When Angela commented on the elaborate table setting, her voice carried an edge that spoke of years spent serving rather than being served in such settings. "I thought we could discuss Lisa's future," Victoria began, cutting into her perfectly cooked salmon. "I've been looking into some private schools that could really open doors for her." The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken implications about opportunity and privilege. Angela set down her fork, her expression tightening. Lisa's current school has served her well so far. Not everyone needs designer education to succeed. The phrase designer education carried years of frustration about systemic inequalities that their shared bloodline hadn't bridged. Lisa, caught between these two strong women, found herself increasingly torn. She admired Victoria's success and the doors she could open, but she also deeply understood her mother's pride and resistance to what felt like charitable intervention. The teenager's presence at the dinner table added another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. As the evening progressed, their conversation veered into dangerous territory when Victoria mentioned her plans to set up a trust fund for Lisa. "It's what family does," she explained, her intentions genuine but her words striking a nerve. Angela's response was immediate and sharp. "Family? Where was this family when my mother was working 3 jobs to put food on our table? Where was this family when I had to take out loans for college?" Her voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "You can't just walk into our lives with your wealth and privilege and try to rewrite our story." Victoria, stung by the rejection of her attempts to help, responded defensively. "I only just learned about our connection. You can't blame me for the choices our grandparents made. I'm trying to make things right." "Make things right." Angela stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. "There's nothing right about pretending money can erase generations of separation and inequality. Our shared DNA doesn't give you the right to try to remake my daughter in your image." Lisa watched this exchange with growing distress, torn between the allure of the opportunities Victoria offered and loyalty to the mother who had sacrificed everything for her. The tension in the room became unbearable, the weight of history and privilege pressing down on all of them. As the evening drew to an uncomfortable close, Angela delivered the words that had been building throughout the dinner. "I'm afraid this connection between us might bring more pain than healing. Maybe some doors are better left closed." This statement hit Victoria like a physical blow, challenging her belief that wealth and good intentions could bridge any gap. The unexpected arrival of Angela's mother, Marie, changed everything. She appeared at Victoria's office unannounced one afternoon, her presence commanding attention despite her simple dress and quiet demeanor. The receptionist, noting the family resemblance, immediately called Victoria. Marie carried with her a weathered leather briefcase filled with documents she'd kept hidden for decades. As she spread them across Victoria's desk, the full scope of their family's history began to emerge. "I've spent 30 years protecting my daughter from this truth," Marie began, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "But I see now that my silence has caused its own kind of damage." The documents revealed that Elizabeth Blake hadn't merely had a secret relationship with James White. She had actively worked to protect and support their extended family for years, using her influence to create opportunities while maintaining a careful distance. However, this support came with an unspoken agreement: complete separation between the two family lines to protect the Blake family's social standing and business interests. Victoria, confronted with evidence of her family's complex legacy of both help and harm, found herself questioning everything about her identity as a Blake. The company she'd built, the success she'd achieved, how much of it had been influenced by her grandmother's careful maneuvering behind the scenes? The revelation forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth that even her own success story wasn't as self-made as she'd believed. Marie shared painful memories of watching her husband, Angela's father, struggle with the knowledge that his family received secret support from the Blakes. "It broke something in him," she explained, knowing that his children's opportunities came from a family that wouldn't publicly acknowledge them. "He left us because he couldn't bear the weight of that shame." This revelation hit Angela particularly hard. The father she'd resented for abandoning them had been carrying a burden she'd never understood. Now she found herself grappling with similar feelings as she watched her own daughter navigate the complicated dynamics of their newly discovered family connection. Victoria, overwhelmed by the magnitude of these revelations, retreated to her family's private study. Surrounded by portraits of Blake family patriarchs and matriarchs, she realized that every face on the wall represented a choice. Choices that had rippled through generations, creating both opportunities and wounds that hadn't healed. When Angela arrived later that day, having received an urgent call from her mother, the three women sat together in Victoria's office, the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on them. Marie finally revealed the full truth about her years of silent compliance with the Blake family's demands, explaining how each decision had been made in what she believed was her daughter's best interest. The conversation stretched into the evening, touching on themes of identity, privilege, and the complex ways family loyalty can both protect and harm. Victoria found herself reevaluating every achievement, every advantage she'd taken for granted. Angela struggled to reconcile her mother's choices with her own fierce independence and determination to succeed on her own terms. The revelation of Marie's decades-long silence created ripples through all their lives. During an emotional conversation in Victoria's study, Angela discovered that her mother had planned countless times to reveal the truth. Marie had even packed a suitcase once, intending to drive to the Blake estate and demand recognition for her family, but fear and protective instinct had always held her back. "I had the plane tickets," Marie confessed, pulling out faded boarding passes from 1995. "I was going to take you to meet Elizabeth Blake when you graduated high school. She was dying then, and she wanted to meet you. But I couldn't bear the thought of you facing rejection or being treated as a secret that needed to be kept hidden." Victoria, processing this information, felt the weight of her family's wealth and influence in a new way. The same power that had built her successful company had also contributed to keeping another branch of her family in the shadows. She spent sleepless nights reviewing her company's hiring practices, community outreach programs, and investment strategies, recognizing patterns of exclusion she had never noticed before. In response to these revelations, Victoria initiated a comprehensive review of her company's impact on underserved communities. She discovered that many of the neighborhoods where Angela's family had lived had been directly affected by TechVision's expansion projects. The realization that her success had potentially contributed to others' struggles struck her deeply. Angela watched Victoria's attempts at corporate responsibility with mixed emotions. While she appreciated the effort to address systemic inequalities, She struggled with the idea that her family's story had become a catalyst for corporate change. During one particularly honest conversation, she expressed this conflict to Victoria. "I understand you want to help," Angela said, her voice tired but determined. "But throwing money at the problem isn't the same as acknowledging the years of pain and separation our family endured. My mother spent her entire life carrying this secret, believing it was protecting me. How do we move forward from that?" The weight of their shared history pressed down on both women as they sat in Victoria's office, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. The pressure of societal expectations and generations of inequality complicated their every interaction. Victoria's attempts to use her influence to help sometimes felt like another form of control, while Angela's resistance to accept help sometimes felt like a rejection of reconciliation. Marie, observing these tensions, finally shared letters she had received from Elizabeth Blake over the years. These letters revealed a woman torn between societal expectations and genuine love for her extended family. Elizabeth had documented her regrets, her hopes, and her dreams for a future where her grandchildren could openly acknowledge their connection. The final pieces of the family puzzle came together when Victoria discovered a hidden safe in her grandmother's old study. Inside lay a confession that would shake both families to their core. Elizabeth Blake had documented a tragic incident from 1968 involving James White and Victoria's grandfather, William Blake. The handwritten account revealed that William Blake had discovered the relationship between Elizabeth and James. In his rage, he had orchestrated a business scheme that led to the collapse of James's small construction company and his subsequent financial ruin. The devastating impact had rippled through generations, directly contributing to the economic disparity between the two branches of the family. Elizabeth's confession detailed how she had tried to mitigate the damage secretly, establishing trust funds and creating opportunities for James's family, all while maintaining the facade of separation that her husband demanded. Her written words carried decades of guilt. "Every success of our family business was built partly on the destruction of James's dreams. My silence made me complicit, and this shame will follow our family until the truth is known." Victoria found herself facing an impossible choice. Making this information public would likely damage her company's reputation and challenge the legitimacy of the Blake family's success. Keeping it hidden would perpetuate the very cycle of secrets and inequality that had damaged both families for generations. Angela, upon learning this truth, understood finally why her grandfather had always warned her about trusting the wealthy. James White had taken the full story of his destruction to his grave, protecting his family from the pain of knowing how deliberately their opportunities had been stripped away. The revelation created a crisis point for both women. Victoria realized that her position of power came with the responsibility to address not just present inequalities, but historical wrongs. Angela found herself questioning whether acknowledgement of past injustices could coexist with a path forward for both families. In a decisive moment, Victoria called a press conference. Standing before journalists and cameras, with Angela and Marie by her side, she revealed the full history of the Blake family's actions. She announced the establishment of the White Blake Foundation, dedicated to supporting minority-owned businesses and providing educational opportunities in underserved communities. The public response was immediate and intense. Some board members threatened to resign, and company stock initially dropped. However, Victoria's transparent acknowledgement of historical wrongs and commitment to substantive change resonated with a society increasingly focused on addressing systemic inequalities. For Angela and her family, the public acknowledgement brought both healing and challenges. Lisa found herself suddenly in the spotlight as the story captured national attention. The teenager's perspective on privilege and responsibility evolved as she watched her mother and Victoria navigate the complex aftermath of truth-telling. The story concluded not with a simple happy ending, but with a complex new beginning. Victoria and Angela established a different kind of relationship, one built on honest acknowledgement of the past and a shared commitment to creating change. Their family story became a catalyst for broader conversations about privilege, responsibility, and the possibility of redemption through action rather than mere acknowledgement. The crescent-shaped birthmark that had first connected them became a symbol of both their shared history and their commitment to a more equitable future. As Victoria often reflected, true legacy isn't just what we inherit, but what we choose to do with that inheritance.